now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and we're here talking to Giorgio Tsoukalos, publisher of Legendary Times magazine, that's legendarytimes.com, about Erich Van Daniken's new book, Twilight of the Gods, and just all kinds of really interesting stuff. Before the break, I mentioned I wanted to go back to that 3114 BC date, where you made the comment that that was the date that the gods came to the earth. Now, I'm going to kind of add a little piece to that. Because according to what I understand, that's actually like the fourth cycle of the long count, which actually takes us back to 26,000 years ago BC, or 26,000 BC, or whatever that number would happen to be. So are we really talking the 3114 BC with the aliens, or are we talking the 26,000 BC date with the aliens? Am I making sense?
Yes, no, absolutely. But here's the thing that the 3114 BC date is basically only one date of one of those visits by extraterrestrials in the remote past, because we have to remind ourselves that these visits have been going on for thousands of years, and it wasn't just one visit. It was multiple visits during different periods of time, in different cultures, and by the way, in every ancient culture, not just in Africa, not just in South America, but also in Europe, in the Scandinavian countries, in the Far East, in Asia, all over the place. Do we have references of these gods that a long, long time ago descended from the sky and taught mankind in various disciplines? And, in one of my previous answers, I briefly said that, God's lowercase g. And I really would like to expound on that a little bit, because the ancient texts that we have do talk about the gods. And the question I have then is, well, who are these gods, or what were they? And mainstream archaeology essentially says, oh, they're just, those gods were just a figment of our ancestors' imagination. And, I really think that is an insult in the face of our ancestors, because they were not stupid. They were not, they were as intelligent as we are today, because nothing changed in our brain development over the last 10,000 years. The only difference was, or is, that their technological frame of reference was way different, more primitive than our technological frame of reference that we have today. So, to suggest that our ancestors were primitive and stupid and things like that is completely false, because they were as intelligent as we are today, because you could conceivably go back in time and bring a Stone Age person to our present day, Stone Age Homo sapiens, and I guarantee you that within 2 weeks, I can teach that person how to drive a car, and within a year, I can teach that person how to fly a plane. Not because they have the same, or had the same brain capabilities as we do today, but that Stone Age person would then have come to grips here in our modern times that none of the stuff that he or she sees around them has anything to do with magic or, the divine spirit, but rather with nuts and bolts technology, which to the Stone Age person at first, and also back then obviously, would appear as complete magic, because I think Arthur C. Clarke, he really summed up the Ancient Astronaut Theory to a perfect T, and I always like to use it because it's absolutely perfect, and that is where he said in 1961, any indistinguishable form of technology. Sorry. Good God, I can't believe it's still happening. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And that sums it up. So while our ancestors were highly intelligent, their frame of reference was different than ours today. So when they saw beings, humanoid-looking beings, descending from the sky in some type of machines, they didn't have the vocabulary for those things. So what did they do? They used the words, the vocabulary that was at their disposal at the time, and thus started to describe something that they saw with the words that they had at their disposal at the time. And then all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, but this is how we got stories of flying shields and fiery chariots, and this thing here was glowing like a fiery furnace up in the air, and things like that. So, and what we try to do is we try to look at all those references and ask ourselves, well, what is it exactly that our ancestors tried to describe here? Because obviously they witnessed something so extraordinary that not only did they commit that stuff on paper or in their oral traditions, but also they made huge monuments to honor these gods. They made carvings. They drew pictures. I mean, all this very amazing stuff that, in my opinion, if the gods or those visitors had only been a figment of our ancestors' imagination, that would have not been compelling enough for our ancestors to break their backs with their, and expend all this sweat and blood to build all this stuff, because I'm sorry, it's just not compelling enough to just say, oh, they did this because, of the invisible man upstairs. Baloney. Something else happened.
You get to somebody like Montezuma, who basically gave up his entire nation because some white guys with beards showed up, but according to their legend, that was the gods.
Not only that, but it gets even more crazy, Doc. And the thing is with that story is that, their gods should have arrived or were always scheduled to arrive every 52 years, and Montezuma or the conquistadors just happened to show up in a 52nd year. It's quote unquote coincidence, but at the same time, that is the reason why, 80 people were able to vanquish 1 million people overnight, essentially. So it was because they just happened to arrive in the same year that their legends said that the gods would return. And now, by the way, I have to also preface, of course, since I've in the beginning of this interview said about, that it's not even 2010 yet. Mind you, that means that also the 3114 BC date is false. So we have to keep that in mind, that our entire calendar is, we don't know what's going on. So, everything has to be taken with a grain of salt. That's all I'm saying.
And just for clarity, for the show purposes, I think using, 2012, even though we both know that whatever, and the 3114 date is whatever, but just for ease of conversation, I guess it works to kind of stick with them, even though we both know, yeah, maybe it could happen, maybe not. One of the things that a lot of people complain, the debunkers, is that there's no evidence. There's no evidence of their civilization. There's no high-tech gear found. They haven't dug anywhere and found a ray gun or whatever. I have my thought on that, but any commentary about that claim?
Of course, and that is, look, and that's an age-old argument, and it, to be honest with you, it is such a lame argument, it's not even funny, because the evidence is all around us. Yes, it's absolutely true that no ray gun has been found, no crashed spaceship from ancient times has been discovered, no levitation machine has been found, and things like this. But the thing is that, the evidence is all around us because we see the signature of this high tech all over the world in stonemasonry that we today would have difficulties recreating. I mean, one of my favorite sites in the world is this place high in the Andean highlands, called Pumapunku, and it's right next to Tiwanaku, very famous archaeological site on the border between Peru and Bolivia, right where Lake Titicaca is, highest navigable lake in the world. And, every day dozens and dozens of tourists come to Tiwanaku, take pictures, and then they drive home again. But only 150 yards away from there is another site called Pumapunku, and what we find there defies logic because you have this entire field of ruins with slabs that are, 10 yards by 5 yards big, size-wise, blocks that weigh upwards of 100 metric tons, all of which at one point fit together perfectly, where you couldn't even put a dollar bill in between the fittings, and we find structures or cuts that are perfectly straight with, little holes every couple of inches. And, mainstream archaeology tries to convince us that all of this stuff was done with chicken bones, string, and obsidian. And I'm sorry, that is a preposterous suggestion because the stone there is granite, or it's a form of granite, diorite and andesite, and the only way that you can cut granite is if you have a material that's harder than that. And there are only two things that are harder, and that's quartzite and diamond. So we basically suggest that some type of an advanced technology existed back then that was brought here by extraterrestrials. Extraterrestrials taught our human ancestors how to operate these tools, how to operate these machines, and then they said, all right, now go ahead and build this. Here are the blueprints, here's the idea, you put the stone here, you put that stone there. I mean, they were just supervisors. They were not the builders. They were not, the pyramids of Egypt, for example, were not built by aliens. It was built by us, human beings, with the assistance of those extraterrestrials. And therein lies a big difference. And so we have all this evidence all around the world where in Ancient Aliens Season 1, Episode 1, The Evidence, we filmed a segment with a guy by the name of Roger Hopkins, and this guy is a real-life stone cutter, and we went to his quarry, his stone shop in Palm Springs, and we basically spent a day there to look what it takes to, in modern times, what tools to use for cutting stone and things like that. And he's got these massive circular saws, massive machines and cranes, and with which he could barely lift a 5-ton block and things like this. I mean, just wild stuff. And then, towards the end of the stay, at the after he showed us how he conducts core drills and how he cuts granite and things like this, I showed him a couple of pictures of Pumapunku, and he was quite fascinated by it. And then I said, Roger, could you replicate this? And he looked at me with smoke coming out of his ears, saying, there is not an amount of money in the world, there's not any amount of money in the world you can give me so that I would say, yes, I'm going to try to recreate this, because we couldn't do it. And here we are in the age of computers, here we are in the age of, quote-unquote advanced technology, and here is a real-life stonemason, a real-life stonecutter telling me that he would have difficulties, if not impossible, for him to recreate this. Now, who am I going to believe? Am I going to believe the professor that's standing in front of a chalkboard, or am I going to believe the real-life stonecutter? God bless the professors. They do great work. But in this case, I will always go with the guy who works with stone in real life. And so, all these questions about, well, why haven't we never found a ray gun, things like that. Look, if we 1,000 years from now arrive on another planet and we encounter intelligent life there, we're not going to bring building materials with us. All we'll bring with us are the tools, and we'll use the intrinsic or the natural resources of that planet to build something, or at least to tell the people there if they could help us build something. And then after our departure, we're not going to leave this stuff behind because it's probably quite valuable. We'll take it with us, and we'll go to the next planet, and so on and so forth.
I don't know if you had a chance to watch that series Chasing Mummies with our good friend Zahi Hawass.
Very good
but in
friend,
one of the...
huh?
No comment. Actually, it was pretty enlightening, just seeing him in his element. Anyway, in one of the episodes, they were lifting a column or a block from, I think it was the Temple of Cleopatra, and it was in the middle of the water, and it was like 5 tons or 9 tons. In perspective, it wasn't all that heavy compared to some of the other sites, the stones and other sites.
Correct.
And what was fascinating, was they had it roped up, and they have a crane on a boat, and so they're lifting it up, and now the crane is ready to fall off the boat, and the boat's ready to sink. I mean, there's all this drama going on, trying to raise this, in perspective, not that heavy stone.
Right.
And I'm watching the show going, they just rolled them rocks on some sticks.
Right, and the sticks, and look, anyone that's ever played in the sand knows, or in dirt, knows how difficult it is to maneuver in that type of environment. And, some of these blocks are, 10, 12, 20 tons that have been found on the Giza Plateau. And I'm sorry, pure logic, pure physics actually proves, and now I'm talking physics, not logic, but physics proves that if you have wooden rollers and if you put a 20-ton block on top of that of these wooden rollers, they will shatter. They will crush into pieces. In fact, at the quarry in Palm Springs with Roger Hopkins, most of his stones were all sort of propped up on, or were on platforms made out of wood, and to protect from the rain or from, I don't know quite exactly why he would put it on wood, but all those wooden beams, all those wooden rollers that these stones were stored on were all crushed and deep in the ground, because of the heavy weight of those stones. So this whole, but we're a very bizarre society. We listen to the experts, we listen to the archaeologists, we listen to Dr. Zahi Hawass, and all we do is, okay, so we're just nodding and saying, yep, okay, he said that's how it is, that's how it is. Where, no one in the ancient alien theory has ever suggested, well, the classic ancient alien theory, which I represent along with Erich and a few others, no one's ever proposed that the pyramids were built by aliens. So I don't understand how, he can be so upset about the whole, alternative history viewpoint because, of course the Egyptians built the pyramids. There's no question in my mind about that. But it was just not done with rope, string, and chicken bones. And, and you brought forth a perfect example with that crane and the boat about to sink. And here we have a block that's maybe 9 tons in water, which means it's even lighter. So, I mean, and there was drama. And then they tell us the pyramid was built in 22 years? Come on.
But from what I understand, some of the stones in Pumapuku were bigger than that, or you talk about the Gateway to the Sun, which is one giant slab that I don't even know how much that puppy weighs, that had to be excavated and carried there and then erected. We're talking about way more than 9 tons.
Oh yeah, no question. I mean, look, there are, for example, there is a site in Lebanon called Heliopolis, and no question, it was a Roman temple, but that Roman temple was built on top of a former temple or a former structure where the Romans only, added their stuff or added their masonry on top of the old structure. Now, the old structure at the very bottom, there are stone blocks that are in excess of 3,500 metric tons. And I'm sorry, we today cannot move 3,500 metric tons. Our limit is around 3,200. Yet there it is, and yes, this was hoisted up with string. Somewhere, because look, I am completely giving our ancestors credit for having built everything, but they didn't build it with the help of chicken bones and string, but they had, according to the ancient texts, they had sophisticated technology at their disposal, magical tools, as they call them, divining rods and things like this, which they never were. I mean, because magic in that sense, of course, unless you fall in love, that's magic. But the other type of magic, the way we are taught today, like Harry Potter, I'm sorry, that magic really does not exist. It was misunderstood technology that our ancestors thought was magic, yet it was all based in very sophisticated nuts and bolts technology.
And I would assume that the technology was all handled by the priests or the people in the know, and so it wasn't known by the general public.
Absolutely, and that's why the general public was duped into doing these things, because the priests were nothing else but the middlemen between, ordinary folk or human beings practically, and the priests were also human beings, and those extraterrestrials. I mean, they were the initiates. So, it's the deeper you look at this, the more clear the picture becomes. And it's such a fascinating story that anyone, look, even somebody with a half a brain could understand where we come from. Yet so many people choose not to see it this way, and I really wonder what else does it take, man? Really? I mean, there it is. We can't do this today, so. Tell me. Oh, well, they had a way, and we don't know how. Well, yes, we do know how, and no, it was not the primitive way of, using rollers and things, because that is not what the ancient texts are saying. Sure, there are carvings where we can actually see in ancient Egypt, for example, where blocks are being moved on wooden rollers. However, then there are also pictures where blocks essentially just float in the air. So could that be levitation right there? But no. What does archaeology do? They see the carving with the wooden rollers and they say, yep, this is correct. And if the next panel right next to it has a block that's floating in the air, they will say, in all honesty, okay, but this panel here, this is fantasy. This never happened. So right here, the artist must have been drunk or on drugs or something. I mean, it's extraordinary that we have these archaeologists, these ethnologists, and again, bless their heart, they're doing great work in general. But they're reading texts, and in one paragraph it says something about this and something about that, and then they say, yes, this is totally acceptable, this is how it was, thank you very much, author of this book or of this text. And then in the same text, the next paragraph or the next line, it says something about a flying machine or gods descending, in a flying chariot, and boom, the mainstream archaeologists are saying, well, yeah, but this part right here, no, that's fantasy. So let's cut that out because that didn't happen. Now, who is insulting our ancestors? People who subscribe to ancient aliens, or people who say, yep, this paragraph is correct, but in the same text, the next paragraph, that's false, that's faulty, this is not right, they were lying to us, or they were just fantasizing right here. I mean, seriously, ask yourself that question.
And it's right up there with the Sumerian texts that blatantly, clearly say that man was created to do the labors of the gods. And we're coming up to break, so I don't even want to go off on this whole tangent, which, well, we can if you want. When we come back from break, I'll go there.
Absolutely. Sure.
Well, okay. Well, then let's get that music to come up, and we'll come back. Ooh, cool. I wasn't prepared for that, but all right. Well, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. The music's going to come up in a second. We're talking to Giorgio Tsoukalos. His webpage is legendarytimes.com. We're here talking about stuff, as well as Erich Van Daniken's new book, Twilight of the Gods, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.